1788, and a company arrive at this very location to build something new, something groundbreaking, and they insist that local workers are used. The local workers turn up, but after a week or so of work here, they realise that they can't earn a daily wage compared to what they were already doing. Welcome to the most dangerous job in history. 1760, it's said that the price of coal in Manchester pretty much halved overnight. The Bridgewater Canal was open and linked the Worsley coal mines to Manchester. The Industrial Revolution had begun. Now, whilst the Bridgewater Canal was very different in its formation to the dozens that almost immediately followed, it didn't employ a contractor, it was paid for by one individual rather than the company. Well, it did, however, pave the way forward for the first generation of canal builders. James Brindley was the engineer for Lord Bridgewater, and now Brindley was very much in demand. And what I love about this era of canal building, this era of history, generation one of canal building, is that these engineers, they weren't really working to any blueprint. Nothing like this had come before. There were new problems that needed new solutions, new technologies. Their work really shaped everything that was to come. That conjures up a romantic image of the time, but of course there is a much darker side, a side that gives us the title of this video. And in telling you today's tales and stories of the Navvy, we're walking along the Basingstoke Canal, the abandoned section. There's quite a lot of little treasures to see. The first is just around this corner. Brindley loved the contour of the land. He loved using those contours to weave his way through the landscape, but as he would learn, this wasn't always possible. If you wanted a profitable canal, it's likely you're going to be moving coal, but if you're moving coal, you're not going to be on flat terrain. This would mean tunnels, embankments and cuttings, and moving earth like never before. So not only are the technologies new, but the workforce needed, that too was new to this world. Generation 1, 1760s, and something like a dozen new canal companies were given royal assent. The newspapers from the time give us a flavour of what's to come. 1767, and a contractor for the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal put an advert out with a list of names of those who had absconded from their work and threatening legal action to those who would potentially employ them. The Chesterfield Canal went to great lengths, stating in their contracts that anyone found absconding would be brought back and docked the cost of doing so from their wages. Their work was truly valued. But the first visual treat today isn't that gorgeous access bridge or whatever it is, the beautiful tree hanging over the scene in front of me. It is just there. There's an old brickworks, Nately Brickworks or Up Nately Brickworks, and in there is a submerged vessel. Come take a look at this. And I have a feeling, perhaps by the amount of rain we've had over the last few months, we might not see the treat I had in mind. I think it's more of a once in 5 yearly event when there's a drought. Yeah, the canal's doing its job in holding water. If it wasn't, sometimes when there's a drought, you'd see just down there a submerged barge. (1788) and the Basingstoke Canal Company are about to build this, the Basingstoke Canal. There we are, the rope mark from the horses pulling the barges along where it wears against the brick. Now, the Reverend Stebbing Shaw provided us with some notes at the time right here, and those notes give us the first biggest clue that the Navvy had arrived. Now, the good Reverend noted that the Basingstoke Canal Company made a demand of the contractor that anybody who lived locally could come here and work should they wish to. He described them as the industrious poor, and they did so. They flocked here, possibly in their hundreds, but after a week or so there was a problem. None of them could earn any sustenance. Now this wasn't because the wages were low. In fact, the opposite is true. The implication is that the Navvy on site here was paid for the amount of earth they moved. So instead of the locals working here, the Navvies from similar operations were brought in, and they did indeed earn a good living. We can now see the type of person needed for this work. The theme continued and the wages rose. The Lancaster Canal reported that some navvies earned 2 shillings and 6 per day. At the time, they employed around 230 of them. The late 1700s would see canal mania at its peak, and the navvy would flock in their thousands to the work. But what exactly did they do, and why was the job so perilous? So Brindley, in his early canal, well, he just utilised the contours of the land and snaked his way through the landscape. But as time went on, the engineers, contractors wanted to take more direct routes, and for that you'd need all sorts of engineering. Let's take, for example, this is probably a maybe 10 or 15 metre deep cutting, and you'd have what was called the dreaded barrow run, the wheelbarrow full of spoil from here and the cutting itself. Your barrow would then be attached to a pulley at the top, and it would be your job as a navvy to guide that barrow laden full of spoil and clays. If you fell and your wheelbarrow fell, well, you need to make sure you're going a different way to the barrow, and often that wasn't the case. So when you do manage to move all that cubic tonnage of earth by the barrel load, you can't just fill it with water and disappear. The next job is to make sure it's watertight, and to do that you'd need maybe 18 inches of a clay-like substance. Puddling was the technique. A loom of soil and finer clay mixed with gravel and sand in some cases in a large slate box. Water was added and it was mixed thoroughly. Truly back-breaking work, but not quite as back-breaking as what you had to do next. Let's jump in the canal. Once you've got that mixture to the perfect consistency, next comes a difficult job. Next comes the stomping. You need to make that at least 18 inches thick, evenly across the canal bed, and you then begin to stomp it in. And of course your boots are now laden with this mixture, your legs are heavy, your back is aching, and you've got a team of you doing stretches of this. Truly back-breaking work. So none of those seem hugely dangerous, just incredibly back-breaking. Now the next job, if I told you was perhaps one of the most dangerous, well, you might question my sanity. It's the opposite of this, the cutting. It's the embankment. Now often embankments were created using spoil from nearby cuttings or even the cut itself. That sounds like an ideal logistical solution, and it was. You see, we are still in the early days of canal building, and you just piled earth on top of itself. Well, even without a bunch of rain and damp, well, you're gonna have collapse after collapse, and they really did in those early days. Now, there are dozens of other jobs we could be discussing when talking about the dangers the navvy faced, and perhaps an honourable mention should go to the technique of piling when you build a coffer dam to support the stanchions for your aqueduct, for example. But perhaps we should be talking about the elephant in the room. We should be talking about this. It took until 1815 for William Smith to publish his geology map, the strata map, detailing the UK and its subsurface of rocks and geology. If only the canal engineers had access to this and understood exactly the implications of it. So this is the western portal of the Greywell Tunnel on the Basingstoke Canal. 1,280 yards long collapse, which pretty much marked the end of the use of the canal into Basingstoke from here, just 5 miles away, hence the term the last 5 miles. And I think I'm going to say the portal is not there. The portal is more likely here, 10 yards further this way, because we've got some lovely brickwork on either side up there as well, and you'd have seen a huge, almost bridge-like front face that was very indicative of the early canal era. Quite an intimidating thing, especially if you're the one that's got to leg it through there. Now when we talk about geology, there are a couple of different issues, perhaps not the obvious one that you might think of: the inhospitable and cold, damp environment. And when I say the word damp, I'm referring to the quality of the air. There are two types. In essence, one is the explosive type, the gaseous methane, would cause you significant problem should it come into contact with a source of ignition. And the second, well, that would be the one that would kill you probably without you even knowing, the choke or the white damp, referring to perhaps the carbon monoxide or hydrogen sulfide that would be present when you start mining certain rock types and coals, that sort of thing. Those were an ever-present danger for the navvy and the labourer building these tunnels. And then there is the other aspect of geology, dealing with the fact it's there, mining through it. Sapperton Canal Tunnel is a great example of a will far greater than that technology available at the time. The desired length was 3,817 yards. Not only was this longer than it ever gone before or attempted before, but it also needed to be over 11 foot wide to accommodate the traffic. I often struggle with the numbers really on the Sapperton Canal Tunnel, because for me it really sums up everything about navvy life. The sheer number of those men working on site on one project. They lived there, they worked there, they drank there, they fought there, and in many cases they died there. And yes, the pay was good, clearly, but imagine living with that trauma, not knowing if you were going to come home from the day's work or your friend wasn't coming home from your day's work. Quite unimaginable. 25 shafts were dug here, plus the 2 portals that gave you 52 working faces. Come night and day, come rain, snow, you'd be lowered down into the dark in a custom-made bucket, attached to some ropes, attached to a gin, a horse there on lowering you down using a winding mechanism from the top. Utterly terrifying. You're being lowered down an 8 foot wide shaft, plunging into the darkness. Reliance on the gin and its many fixings, all holding your life by the very thread. And you'd then meet up with your gang, maybe 6 to 8 of you, working on this front face, and you'd be doing one of the many jobs that was involved there, from either right at the front face, either blasting or chipping away depending at the soil, or removing the earth away. There might be rudimentary rails, all in a very confined space, a pilot tunnel that would have been dug there, and then the bucket full would be pulled up the gin and taken up the maybe 30-40 metre shaft right above you. Speaking of dangers, we're right now on top of the Greywell Tunnel. In fact, that pond there sits right on top of, highly likely, one of the collapsed areas of the Greywell Tunnel, which obviously led to its demise. And you wouldn't want to stand in there in a hurry, even when the water's a lot lower in the summer. Injuries were not always listed, but at least until the railway days, suffice to say, accounts detailed the loss of limbs, crushed body parts, you name it. A newspaper report in the Gloucester Journal, 1787, the 2nd of January. One man was killed a few days ago due to the carelessness of his companion, who suffered one of the boxes used to draw the earth up from the shaft to fall back into the pit, which killed the person at the bottom. The men were brothers. At the turn of the century, navvies had a reputation that perhaps did them no favours at all. Numerous reports of stealing, petty crime, fights, theft, all followed them like a bad smell in every corner of the land, and had done so now for the last 30 years or so. But things were about to change in perhaps the most dramatic way. South Wales perhaps showed us why. Canals would often have small branches to connect towns and wharfs or mines for coal. That wasn't easy in the hills of South Wales. So instead, the likes of the Brecknock and Abergavenny Canal, itself only 33 miles long, was littered with connecting tramways, some over 8 miles in length. The canals here were almost a victim of their own success. They were carrying goods from every corner of the valley here. Bottlenecks were happening at every possible juncture. It would take a Cornish engineer in 1803 to perhaps change the way the Navvy would work forever. He travelled to South Wales with a steam engine, different to every steam engine that had previously been built, because this one not only had wheels but managed a trip of over 8 miles. It successfully carried 10 tons of iron, 5 wagons and 70 men the full distance in 4 hours and 5 minutes. The world of mining and resources was changing rapidly because of this new technology, the tramways and the wagonways, and its new reliance. The likes of George Stephenson up in North East England doing tremendous work. Things were about to change for the Navvy. The railway did provide similar work. Tunnels, cuttings, embankments, even more so, required to be hand dug by the Navvy. But over half a century after the canals started, well, you'd have thought the lessons may well have been learnt. And here we are on top of what is almost certainly the alignment of the Greywell Tunnel, and probably a spoil heap from said tunnel. In fact, the lessons that should have been learnt over the last 50 or so years would continue to blight the seemingly groundbreaking technology that the railway age was about to bring. 1830 and the Liverpool and Manchester Railway's first tunnel casualty. A navvy was alongside a 15-foot pile of clay being hauled by a wagon when it toppled. The local paper holding nothing back when it reported that it crushed his bowels out of his body. For me though, perhaps the most poignant story of all comes from the London and Southampton Railway, opened just 8 years on in stages. The middle section was the last to open owing to the Waller's Ash Tunnel. At 500 yards long, it saw a shaft collapse within 2 years of opening. The navvies and the labourers were repairing this when a further collapse happened on the shaft at the southern end. 4 men were crushed. The seriousness of this case meant that the initial jury selected for the inquest and hearing were considered poorly selected for such an investigation. He would therefore discharge the present jury immediately and issue another warrant requiring the constable to summon a class of persons more independent in station and character. Come the mid-1840s, we now have over 200,000 navvies working across the UK. Now, compare that perhaps to the armed forces at the time. The Army and the Navy combined just 160,000, but nothing really sums everything up as well for me as this one stretch of railway below me right now. You see, this is a stretch of railway I've travelled on hundreds of times before. Huge cutting there ahead of me. I never really given it a second thought as to the amount of work that went into making that happen, shaping the way we live and work and travel today. Hundreds and hundreds of navvies would have been working here, cutting through that in the most dangerous working conditions, all just for a daily wage, and often making a sacrifice they never bargained for. And that is why I feel the Navvy is one of the, if not the most dangerous job in history. I've been Paul. If you like this kind of content, give us a like and maybe a subscribe. And of course, if you really like this content, we have a behind the scenes weekly videos for our patrons and YouTube members. See you this time next week. So once you've got your mixture, okay. Yeah, man.